roughly 60% of all legendary and mythical Pokemon are dual typed, which is a higher percentage than the Pokédex on large. I guess that with legendary power comes multiple types, huh? But I still don't think it's high enough, so I'm gonna do exactly what the title says and turn every monotype legendary and mythical into a dual type. We're just gonna follow the dex order, cause why not? Which means we start with the Mew duo. After all, both Cantonian and Galarian Moltres, Zapdos and Articuno are already dual typed. Mewtwo is immediately a pretty interesting case though, because unlike most of the Pokemon in this video, it already gets a second type upon changing forms. Mega Mewtwo X is a fighting type of course. But we can't just be going around sticking that on regular Mewtwo as well. While it may not look so different, Mega Mewtwo X has a pretty different philosophy from regular Mewtwo, with its dex entries specifying its psychic powers have improved its physical strength greatly, which is also shown in its stat spread. Normal Mewtwo has the skinniest arms around, making it a fighting type makes no sense. Instead, I would say the dark type makes the most sense, especially when you judge it by the Japanese name Evil. In the mainline games, Mewtwo isn't really evil, and other antagonistic Pokemon have not always been dark types either, like Eternatus or Giratina. If you look at side material though, Mewtwo is often portrayed as a Pokemon with an antagonistic side, and it has several dex entries that highlight its cutthroat nature, calling it vicious, savage, and mentioning it lacks compassion. That should be enough to qualify it as a dark type, I would say. Its little original Mew is a tad harder, a second type is at least less obvious. You might be inclined to go fairy, seeing as Mew is this cute little mystical thing, and fairy types tend to go in that direction, but I don't know. The president isn't really there. I mean, Celebi, Jirachi, Victini, those all aren't fairy either, and it's not like Mew has anything Fey-like about it. If you look at Mew's actual capabilities, what makes it unique and its role in the Pokemon world, I think you end up with one type and one type only: normal. Think about it, Mew is described as this sort of ancestor Pokemon, capable of learning every TM under the sun, and it's pretty much the only Pokemon beyond Ditto that is known to use Transform. All of those things are usually translated into Pokemon mechanics using the normal type. Transform is a normal type move, Ditto is a normal type Pokemon, normal types learn the most TMs, Arceus and Silvally can change types on the fly, but they're naturally normal. I think it makes sense. Even if there is nothing normal about Mew, looking at what Pokemon has established normal can mean, I think it makes by far the most sense. Time to hop across the border to Johto, where we have the 3 legendary beasts waiting for us. Let's start with the hardest one, which in my eyes is none other than Raikou. Everything about Raikou is pretty much just electric. There is nothing else to it whatsoever. Sure, it can summon rain clouds from which it shoots thunder, but water is obviously not an option, and taking on the dragon type from Raging Bolt also makes no sense. So for completely different reasons than last time, I am once again picking normal here. With Mew, it made sense and I fully support it. With Raikou, it's pretty much because I think normal makes more sense than the other options. At the very least, I will say that compared to Entei and Suicune, I feel like Raikou looks the most like the actual animal it's based on. With Entei and Suicune, you can maybe not see they're supposed to be cat and dog-like, but Raikou is easily recognizable as a saber-toothed cat. And resembling an animal is sometimes translated as normal type, so it's better than nothing. Out of this trio, I think Suicune is the easiest. While you could make the argument that its immense speed and connection to the northern winds should be translated to a flying type, I think the lack of actual flying kinda disqualifies that, and so I'm gonna go with ice instead. The northern winds are known for being the cold winds blowing in from the polar regions, so that checks out, and the purple mane on its back are surely meant to convey the image of Aurora Borealis, also called the polar or northern lights, which are again mostly seen in cold areas. The crystal on its face is also quite easy to interpret as something belonging to an ice type, and it learns several ice type moves like Sheer Cold, Blizzard, Ice Fang, Mist, and the attack it used to be pretty strongly associated with, Aurora Beam. So yeah, this is a definite one for me, no doubt about it. For Entei, we have 2 options for pretty much the same reason. This Pokemon is strongly associated with volcanoes and volcanic eruptions, and that makes tacking on either the ground or the rock type the most sensible, I think. In general, Pokemon tends to interpret volcanoes as both of these types. Just think of Camerupt on one hand and Macargo on the other, but generally speaking, I feel like ground makes more sense, especially in the context of Entei. Its connection is not so much with volcanic rock, so lava, magma, but more the idea of an eruption, cracks in the ground that lava flows out of. While Entei doesn't learn a single move of either of these types, it does have access to like 4 or 5 ground TMs and only 1 rock though, so let's consider that the final push and go for fire and ground for Entei. When we get to Hoenn, we come to a pretty unique situation we have to deal with, the Regis. 6 Pokemon in total, 5 underlings so to speak and Regigigas, who are all monotyped and clearly designed to be monotype. And we're gonna change that. Now, seeing as this group all has the same design philosophy and there is a severe lack of a perfect option, I think it makes the most sense to give all of them the same shared second type, which also means that anything already used in the group is off the table. Not that I was considering making Regice an electric type, but still. If you look at what these Pokemon are based on, the ground type would make the most sense. They're not called the legendary golems for nothing, and golems are usually clay figures that come to life, i.e. creatures made out of what would be considered the ground type. The only problem is that in the Pokemon world, all of the Regis are made by Regigigas by materials that gave them their type. Making them all ground types would completely ruin that. So instead, I think Psychic makes the most sense, for the simple reason that this is a type often associated with the idea of object given life, which is exactly what the Regis are. Pokemon like that are usually either Ghost, if the given life aspect is done through possession or spirits, or Psychic, when it's more of an object given a conscious, the ability to think. The latter one applies here, and so every single Regi will be partly Psychic type from now on. And that includes Regigigas, because while there is no record of this Pokemon being created in the same way, just to tie them all together I think it makes sense. Not to mention that Psychic is still seen as the type for the immensely powerful, especially when it comes to mysterious powers. And we immediately run into that again when looking at the box legendaries from the Hoenn region, Groudon and Kyogre. Groudon is super easy. We just take after its primal form and add fire to the mix. I cannot have been the only kid growing up during Gen 3 who already thought Groudon was a fire type to begin with. Kyogre is really hard though, this is basically another Raikou, and this is one where I would consider Psychic as an option. Based on what, you ask? Well, honestly, nothing specific. Sheerly its immense power, which again is occasionally translated into the Psychic type in Pokemon, as well as how much of its characteristics match Lugia's, and there they are translated into the Psychic type. But it only learns Calm Mind, not even something like Psychic or Extrasensory, so there's basically no basis for it. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I think Normal is also an option. Yeah, I just called it immensely powerful, but for a legendary Pokemon, Kyogre's design, just like Raikou's, is fairly animalistic. It's pretty clearly a whale, that's not hard to miss. So from that perspective, tacking on the Normal type is arguable, not to mention that it does learn several Normal type moves, like Body Slam and Double Edge. I also briefly considered Rock, due to the fact that it is a primal Pokemon, and that can be translated into a Rock type, but that would really only work if Groudon was also Rock, which it isn't. And so I'm gonna call it for Normal, but that is with pain in my heart, I gotta say. Moving on, we have Deoxys, which really had me wishing that Cosmic or Lunar type people are always on about really existed, because that would make this one super easy. Instead, we now have one of the hardest, because honestly, its typing of Psychic barely makes sense. Deoxys is a really tricky one. I think we basically have 3 options, none of which are really perfect. First, you have Dark, for the same reason as Mewtwo. Deoxys is basically always portrayed as a threat, a danger. That said, compared to Mewtwo, its demeanor is not remotely as vicious or, well, dark. Secondly, there is the Rock type. After all, Deoxys arrives on a meteorite, it is strongly associated with them, just look at how it changes forms, and the crystal, a type of rock, on its body is apparently its brain, so quite important. It's decent, I think, far from perfect, but better than Dark. And lastly, we have Poison. Don't forget, Deoxys is a virus, which may not literally be a poison, but it's close enough. Purely looking at what Deoxys really is, the poison explanation would make the most sense, but I think the connection between a virus and the poison type is too weak to beat a rock, personally. Although that is only if you consider the crystal in its center to be a rock, which I do, in which case there is a stronger connection than just the meteorite. Next up we get the Sinnoh, which has the largest batch of monotype legendaries and mythicals out there. Starting with the Ley Guardians, we get basically the reverse question of the Regis. Are we gonna keep up the motif and give all of them a shared second type too, which would almost certainly have to be Fairy, or give all of them a different type to differentiate them more? Well, I would like to say the latter, that was my first instinct, but the problem is that the Ley Guardians are not really different enough to warrant it. So, Azelf represents willpower. Okay, that can work. That's something a special attacking fighting type might focus on. But then you have Mesprit and Yuxi that don't really work. Yuxi is knowledge, but knowledge is the psychic type, and Mesprit is emotion, which is not really associated with any type to begin with, but all Pokemon that are about reading emotions are also psychic type, like the Hatena and the Raltsline. So yeah, Azelf can manage, the other two not so much. I guess that if you really want to stretch things, you could make Mesprit normal to show that emotions are normal to have, and have Yuxi a fairy type because, well, they're all fairies. But at that point, you have basically accepted defeat. Might as well make all three of them fairy types then. Fairy is a type you can also give to a bunch of other Sinnoh legendaries though. For example, while we didn't give it to Mew, because Celebi and Jirachi also didn't have it, I think Manaphy does warrant being a fairy type. Not only because it is by far the most obvious choice, but Manaphy also feels a tad more Fey-like than Mew did. You could also then pass on Fairy to Phione, but I think making this one a normal type is more fitting, to highlight that while Manaphy is the true legendary here, Phione is actually pretty, well, normal. Fairy is also an option for Shaman, you know, since it's another cute cuddly Pokemon, but I don't think it's Fey-like enough to really qualify. We could also give it Flying, because although base Shaman can fly yet, it's not unheard of for Pokemon to already have a type that suits a form change more, just think of Morpeko for example. However, I think Flying is such a specific ability that it can access due to its form change that making a normal Shaman Flying type doesn't work. But I already kinda said it there. I think normal does work. Not only does it contrast nicely to its flying type, there is also again that clear animal connection, with Shaman being a very by-the-books hedgehog. Fairy and Flying return as the two candidates when it comes to Cresselia. I think the Fairy connection is a weak one to be honest, it's mostly based on vibes and design, while Flying definitely makes more sense. Not only is Cresselia a swan that can fly with wings, it is also very often portrayed as literally flying or floating. It would definitely make sense, but I have an idea that I think is more fun. I want to make Cresselia and Darkrai even bigger counterparts, and I want to do that by making Cresselia a Psychic Dark type and Darkrai a Dark Psychic type. That may sound a little weird, giving polar opposites effectively the same type, but I have my reasons. First, Cresselia. No, this Pokemon does not remotely qualify for that evil description, but it is very strongly associated with the moon. It's literally the lunar Pokemon. And the moon, well, that is very strongly associated in Pokemon with the Dark type. Many nocturnal Pokemon are Dark types, and plenty of them have a strong connection to the moon. Just think of Umbreon, Roaring Moon, and while Lunala is obviously a ghost type, I think that is close enough to at least show there is some basis for it. And on the other hand, you have Darkrai, who is all about nightmares and dealing with dreams. And sure, nightmares may be dark, even if the move itself is a ghost type move, dealing with dreams is actually more of a psychic thing. Think Drowsy, Musharna, Dream Eater, Hypnosis, that's all psychic. Sure, if you think Cresselia being flying and Darkrai being ghost makes more sense, I certainly can't fault that, but I think strengthening their relationship by giving them reverse types is a good idea, especially when you consider there is a basis for it. Alright, then we have one more Sinnoh Pokemon, and that is one that is certainly monotyped, but also kinda not. Arceus. Its ability is literally called multi-type, so it's a dubious case, but no form of Arceus is ever dual-typed, so it does qualify. And while it goes against the entire philosophy of the Pokemon, we gotta make it work, so I'm gonna keep it simple. Its normal type is the type that always changes, and its second type is permanently psychic. Again, it's the type associated with immense, incomprehensible power and mystique. If Arceus doesn't qualify for that, I don't know who does. Next up, Unova, which may have a gigantic amount of legendaries and mythicals, but only one is monotyped, and changing that feels wrong. But that doesn't matter, the first ever mono flying type, Tornadus, has got to change. And boring as it is, I don't think anything else but normal makes sense. You have to make it very clear here that whereas for the other forces of nature, flying is a secondary type, for Tornadus it's the main one. And the only really fitting way to do that while making a dual type as well is by adding the normal type. This is probably the one Pokemon in this video where the concept doesn't really add any fun discussion, and I wish I could just skip it, but alas, here it is. Moving on quickly to Xerneas, a pure fairy type, for now. Although we can keep this one short. I'm honestly kinda surprised Xerneas isn't a grass type to begin with. It is so strongly associated with forest, with nature. Its dormant form is literally a tree, and it learns just as many grass-type moves as it does fairy. You could make the argument for Psychic, due to its mystical and unexplainable powers, or Normal, due to the fact it's a simple deer at the end of the day, but I think Grass is way more fitting. On to Alola, starting with the mini Arceus that are type Null and Silvally, both of which should certainly share the same type. And unlike Arceus, they certainly shouldn't be Psychic either. Arceus' powers are unexplainable, these two were man-made, there is nothing mystical about them. Purely looking at their design, I think one type immediately jumps out, and it's one we haven't even mentioned yet in this entire video: Steel. Both these Pokemon look like their bodies, at least to some degree, consist of metal parts, like the helmet, Silvally's visor, and the horn on its head, whatever it's called. It being man-made only further strengthens the Steel connection obviously, and I don't really see an alternative, so let's lock this one in and continue with another evolution line, Cosmog and Cosmoem. They evolve into dual types, Solgaleo and Lunala, but these two are not yet. If only we had that Cosmic or Luna type right now, but no. And I'm gonna keep it short here again. I vote that these two have different types depending on versions to match who they will evolve in. It's not a perfect solution, and it's unprecedented really, a type depending on version, but it's really the only thing that makes sense. If I had to pick one of the two types, I would probably go Steel to explain how ridiculously heavy they are, and they don't strike me as ghosts whatsoever, but making Cosmog and Cosmoem Psychic Steel only to then evolve into Lunala doesn't really make sense. So the version difference solution it is. Okay, we go from a few simple ones to a Pokemon with a ton of options, Necrozma. Its base form is pure Psychic, but it has 3 different forms ready and waiting, one of which is Steel, to match Solgaleo, one is Ghost for Lunala, and then you have Ultra Necrozma, who is part Dragon. Which one of these will I pick? None of them, to be honest. For the simple reason that it is quite obvious that these secondary types are derived from something base Necrozma doesn't have. Solgaleo, Lunala, and an overwhelming amount of power in the case of Ultra Necrozma. I will say though, I think the argument for Dragon can be made. At least Ultra Necrozma appears to tap into lingering power. It's not like it absorbs Dragon energy, so it must already be there to some extent. But no, my final answer is the Dark type, and I base that completely on Dex entries. Necrozma lives off light, it consumes it, and so darkness follows it everywhere it goes, down to its own body being darkened as a result of slumbering in darkness. No light literally means darkness, 1 + 1 is 2. Not to mention that it is described as raging, violent and vicious, all words that are suitable for a dark Pokemon. Boy, what do you think Zeraora's second type should be? Man, how the hell do we live in a world with a Mega Zeraora and it still isn't a fighting type? I don't get it. But yeah, of course, fighting type for Zeraora, that's an easy one too. Fighting was also a consideration for Meltan and Melmetal, purely based on the way they fight, with the Dex mentioning punches for Melmetal, but looking at their move pool, I think they have to share another type with Zeraora, Electric. Melmetal learns more electric type moves than it does Steel, and Meltan even knows Thundershock from the get-go. I gotta say, I can't explain why this is beyond metal conducting electricity, since none of their Dex entries or lore specify a connection to electricity. But the numbers don't lie, electric it is. 5 more Pokemon to go, all hailing from the last 2 generations and specifically their expansion passes. The first is another Cosmog-Cosmoem situation, Kubfu. Here though, it doesn't work to give Kubfu the type of its evolved form already, it's your choice. Can't really predict that. So in that light, I think there's only one option, say it with me now, Normal. It amplifies that there is something still to be unlocked here, a hidden potential, and it is fitting seeing as Kubfu is pretty much still a simple bear in essence. If Teddiursa can be normal, so can Kubfu. For Glasstrier and Spectrier, we have another familiar situation. Are we gonna use this opportunity to tie them together, or simply stick to what makes sense individually? Personally, I'm inclined to go with the former. I think these two are so similar design-wise that a shared type is fitting. That still leaves 2 options on the table though, Normal and Dark. Normal speaks for itself. Design-wise, both are pretty standard horses, so Normal can be argued, especially when you look for something they share. Dark type is less obvious, I will admit, but the possibility is there. Spectrier obviously already feels quite dark, that kinda comes with the ghost territory, and Glasstrier has a Dex entry that mentions it's belligerent and takes what it wants by force, which sounds fairly dark to me. Gotta say though, as much as I would like to avoid picking normal again, I do think it makes more sense than dark, especially when you consider that the dark type for Glastrier only works now because it has so few dex entries. If it had more, then its minor dark elements wouldn't really stand out as much. And then finally we arrive in Paldea, or rather Kitakami, in the depths of Area 0 for Ogerpon and Terrapagos. Ogerpon is another Pokemon that is only a monotype in its base form, with its masks already adding fire, water and rock type of course. Should then also be clear that these are not actual options for the Pokemon itself, the power comes from the masks. It makes no sense to give a regular Ogerpon one of these types. While the story of the game would probably point Ogerpon in the direction of a dark type, judging by how it is feared and what its reputation is, we now know of course that is not the truth at all, so that being an internet power of it doesn't really work. And that leaves the fighting type. Ogerpon's movements are very martial arts heavy, and its dex entry too specifies how it uses powerful kicks and fast movements even in its normal form. Fighting is always a bit of a tricky one to tag on, seeing as all Pokemon are suited for battles of course, but usually martial arts means fighting type, and Ogerpon has that covered to an acceptable degree. And finally, Terrapagos, another Pokemon of the normal because it is everything philosophy. In this case though, I think there is a very clear answer to what the secondary type should be: rock. I mean, its entire main body is made of Terra Crystals, which are literally rocks, to the point they already contribute to rock typing in Glimmet and Glimmora for the same reason. If Terrapagos wasn't this special Pokemon, it would probably already be a rock type. So for me, this is one where a ton of discussion really isn't necessary. And that has been all of them. Do you agree with my picks? What would you do differently? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, subscribing. If you're also interested in either the Mario or Fire Emblem series, you may want to check out my other channels, Pichupedia and Nagapedia. Links are in the description. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.